Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first episode of N8n at Scale. My name is Angel, and the goal of this webinar series is to help IT ops and enterprise users get the most out of N8n's automation platform by integrating with enterprise-level software and showing you tips and tricks on how to make that process smoother and more sustainable over time. So, now to stay up to date with the latest episode of N8n at Scale, let's make our way to our website. Here on the homepage, if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see our events button right here. Just click on that, and that'll take you to our community hub. You can subscribe to updates anytime there's any kind of events or N8n at Scale webinars coming up. We'll be posting them here for easy availability. Now, without further ado, let's dive into it. Once again, my name is Angel. A little bit about myself. I've been working with IT ops and cybersecurity for the past 5 years and in web design for over 15 years, running my own web development firm and really trying to make the whole process of automation and interaction between users and the back end as simple and smooth as possible. My goal has always been to reduce user actions down to one click if possible, or as few clicks as possible. And I've taken that approach to my software engineering background, and it's been very successful. And at these companies that I've worked at, Threat Connect, BlackCloak, even Palo Alto, I've been a big evangelist of N8n because it's such a simple platform to utilize, and it not only allows you to visualize the things that you're trying to build, but it lets you quickly iterate on your ideas. So you can have an idea, you can quickly connect to an API, and see if it's possible very quickly without wasting too much time. Today, I hope to share my insights and experience across these organizations in streamlining processes and showing you how we can approach things in a way that makes things easier for both your IT ops teams and for your users. So let's take a look at what our webinar series today is focused on. So our title today is Mission Control Center in Slack, Leveraging BlockKit and N8n for IT Ops Mastery. So my goal today is to show you just how powerful Slack can be when it comes to tying different software together using their BlockKit builder, which you can think of BlockKit builder as a UI builder within Slack's backend API. It's kind of like a hidden series of pop-ups and tooling that allows you to create user interfaces to allow users to stay within Slack, but then output that data to any platform that you want. So today's agenda is going to be essentially how to make a mission control within Slack. To that end, we're going to be talking a little bit about the benefits of staying within Slack. We're going to demo a workflow that I've put together with modal pop-ups. We're going to do a deep dive into BlockKit. We're going to talk about a few gotchas that you'll need to be aware of to be able to utilize the platform effectively. And we're going to be talking about IT ops general use cases. Now, why would we use Slack? Why not some other platform? There's plenty of them, as you can imagine. And I think some of these answers are pretty self-explanatory. So Slack is a central employee hub. Many enterprise-level organizations are already using Slack in this way, essentially as a central place for people to communicate, to work together. And there's already many integrations built into many popular softwares out there that essentially allow messaging to appear within Slack to make the process much smoother. This also will tie into how having messaging without automation can create challenges. So if you get notifications, it's great. But if those notifications aren't actionable and you have to leave Slack, open up a new software, log in via SSO, then go ahead and take action, those steps over time in aggregate create a lot of friction with users, and it leads to less than optimal work conditions for the end user. So my goal today is to show you why combining N8n and BlockKit within Slack can help reduce that friction and make life easier for both your users and your IT ops teams. Now let's talk a little bit about why users like it. Pretty straightforward, no real learning curve. It's basically a chat platform. It creates a single source of truth, so people are able to chat in real time. Everybody can kind of stay up to date on what's going on within channels. And I think most importantly is that it works seamlessly across both mobile and desktop. And that to me is one of the bigger issues here, because in enterprise level organizations, most times you are authorized to use software on your phone. or at least Slack, but maybe not other systems. Maybe you have some kind of an SSO tool, which requires certain authentication. So let's say you need to log into your laptop to be able to access your ticketing system. So if you need to submit a ticketing bug, if you're in the airport, you don't have time to pull out your laptop, it's very difficult to essentially pull that out and log into your SSO, make sure everything's set, and then submit the ticket. By the time you get to the ticket submission, to the action part, you've already had so much friction that many times people don't even go through the hassle of it, and then they forget, which can create issues. So being able to just pop open your phone, submit a ticket via Slack, and move on with your day can reduce the friction to a point where users don't mind essentially communicating those issues with other teams. And that can help reduce some of the siloing issues that we see in some of the enterprise organizations. Now, how does this benefit our IT ops teams that are the ones in the back end, making sure that we're not getting hacked, that we're not, that our teams are following procedures and processes and are utilizing the right tools? Within Slack, we have granular permissions already built in, and we can tie BlockKit Builder into these permissions or into these teams to allow for granular team-based access. This will simplify your logging and auditing as well, as you only have to have a single source of truth, your Slack directory, to essentially allow for IDing and integrating within other operations and systems. We can also create team-based permission restrictions, so it helps make things a little bit quicker. It's agnostic of back-end and front-end, so what we can do is using the BlockKit, we can allow for teams to utilize whatever platforms they want for their back-end work. So if you have a support team that wants to use, for example, Jira or Linear, for example, you can have them use it, but the hard part is getting the front-end users to learn how to utilize Jira or Linear or even other tools like Notion. Many times the front-end users like sales teams or customer support teams don't want to learn other teams' platforms just to be able to submit a ticket. So not only that, but when those systems change, it creates friction in teams having to learn other systems just to be able to do the same thing they used to do one way. Now they have to do it a different way. By decoupling the front end from that system and tying into that system's API, you can keep a standardized front end process. And even if the back end process changes, it's just a matter of changing an n8n workflow one time, and the users don't even know that the system has changed. They shouldn't have to. The other thing is cost savings. We don't want to have to purchase more UIs, more systems, more form tools, just to be able to utilize a central hub system. And that leads us to using Slack as a mission control center. Now, to do this, we're going to use BlockKit. Now, what is BlockKit, right? You might be asking. BlockKit is the UI builder or the UI tools that allow you to create these UIs. So I've got some examples here on the slide to essentially allow your teams to submit, data into different systems. And that's usually what we're doing is typically we'll have a front-end team submitting data from one system to another. And how can we get that system from point A to point B in as efficient time as possible with the least amount of friction? That is our goal. So on the next slide, what we're going to be looking at is an example of how BlockKit makes this process simple. So I've put together a tool that we use internally here at n8n, and this tool allows us to upload images onto an S3 bucket that we utilize via Cloudflare to host public images for marketing purposes. So if I'm looking to upload an image that I'm going to use in a workflow, I can essentially upload it, copy the URL, and then paste it, and that is now a public image that I can link to anywhere. This allows us to have control over our images, and we don't have to use a third-party service like Imgur or Dropbox or something like that to publicly host images. So let's see how this works in Slack. I'm going to be showing a little demo video, and then from there we'll actually dive into the tool itself so you can see how it works. So here it is. Here's our n8n Labs Slack instance. We just hit the / here, and as you can see, we get a list of our global shortcuts. Here's our file upload process. So here we can choose to either create a new folder. As you can see, I don't even have to click a submit button. It just takes me to the new folder creator. Now, I've already got a folder created for this, so I'm not going to utilize this functionality. Let's go ahead and look at all of our folders. And that was the main reason for this tool, is I needed a way to see all of our folders rather. And here, all I have to do is type in the word all. It sends it to another workflow that queries them, sends the data back to BlockKit, and here I can choose which folder I want to use. I can utilize the upload process within Slack itself natively. Now, you do need to do a little bit of validation. So the S3 bucket does not allow for special characters. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that in this image and just clean up the text. This is something that you can do in n8n without having to do it manually like I'm doing here. So there we go. The image is being uploaded to Slack servers. We go ahead and hit the upload button at the bottom right-hand corner, and that can be customized to say whatever you like. And there we go. The image is now uploaded. And as you can see, it's even expanding the image to be visual within the platform because it's a public-facing image. So now I can copy that URL, and I'm good to go. Now, this is all powered by this n8n workflow. So this workflow that we're looking at here, we're going to take a look at this live here in just a moment. Essentially powers this whole thing. So that initial pop-up when you hit the global, when you type in the shortcut, powers this modal pop-up. Then when you select one of the two options, it chooses one of these two pop-ups. And when you submit the file, it goes down this path and it uploads the file here to our S3 bucket. And it loops up to 10 times across those files. And then it displays an aggregate of all 10 files with different links for each one. Now, let's look at this live. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up our Slack instance again, and I'm going to upload an image here. So I'm just going to go / upload an image. Here it is once again. I'm going to use an existing folder just like before. And again, here I'm going to type in all. And this functionality right here, so we are limited into the number of elements that we put within the BlockKit builder. I think it's 100 elements that you can only have here. Now, we may have more than 100 folders. So I'm using a functionality within BlockKit that allows you to query an API and return back a curated list of values. It's not being stored in BlockKit. It's actually using an API to display this. So let's take a look. I'm going to go ahead and do test folder here. I'm going to go ahead and upload. And then we're going to do Slack. Once that uploads up to Slack servers, we're going to go ahead and hit upload. We'll give it just a moment. And there it is. Excellent. There's our image. Now, the reason I did this live is because I want to be able to show this to you in the back end. So I've gone ahead and pulled up our workflow here. Let's go ahead and take a look at our executions. Executions are essentially the processes as they have fired live so that we can play with them. So I'm going to start with the first one. Let's dive right into it. And what I'm going to do, this is one of our pro features here, but I'm going to go ahead and copy it into our editor so we can play around with this and see this live. So I'm going to hit copy to editor. I'm going to unpin this data, and there we go. So let's go ahead and zoom in so this is a little bit easier to view. And as you can see, we have a green line that dictates where the data flowed. So essentially the first was our webhook. So Slack is sending this data straight to our n8n webhook. Here we take the contents of that webhook and we essentially interpret it into JSON. So it starts out as this string object that we'll go ahead and see here. So here's the payload. So it's just a string JSON object. And what we want is to convert this from a string to an actual JSON object that n8n understands. So here we've called that object response, and we've made sure to choose the JSON object so that it recognizes that it's supposed to be a JSON object like we see here on the right. And here we have basically clicked and dragged the payload here. That allows us to then get this. So this is the input and this is the output. And that's one of the reasons I love n8n. It's very simple. Every one of these, and we call these nodes, every one of these nodes has an input and an output, and that's it. Now, here we need to route the data. So within BlockKit, there are different like anchors, if you will, that tell it what type of data it is. So if we open this up, you'll notice that there are 3 different routes that the webhooks can take. So the first one is idea selector. And what we're doing is looking for anything that is equal under callback ID, under response.callback ID to idea selector. That's the name of this app. And we can change it to whatever we want within BlockKit. For now, this is the one I chose. And this is the same name as another one that I used previously, so I probably should have renamed it to image upload, but I never got around to it. Then we have block actions. So this is when we click on one of those, either to create a folder or upload a folder. So that's under here. We can see it says shortcut, but it does not match block action. So shortcut in this case is essentially the actual global shortcut that made it pop up. And then block action, and then submit data here is if it showed up as view submission, it would have been the submission of the data. So here, as you can see, we're actually going to go through the first route. And so here we can see that that's exactly what happened. We've responded to Slack's webhook, letting it know, hey, we got the webhook call. Thank you so much. You're good to go. That way Slack knows that everything's working on our app. And then here is where we have the response. So this actually should be going in the header, not in the query parameter. It still works regardless, but that was a mistake on my end. But no big deal. Still works just fine. But if we scroll down to the bottom, here is where the important portion is. So I'm just going to expand this. And as you can see, here we have, so I want you to imagine that this is broken down into two portions. And we're working internally to get this made a little bit easier so that you only have to paste this portion, because this portion is really where the BlockKit begins. Everything before this is essentially a container, a little holder that gives Slack some context and lets it know, hey, this is the person that requested it. This is the trigger ID. And as you can see, it's a very long trigger ID. On the right, but essentially it tells it, hey, this is where the data or the response or the modal pop-up needs to go to. But what I want to show you is on the right-hand side. So here, as you can see, we even have the person's name being sent in from the webhook. So that allows us to make it very customized, make it feel like we're connected to the person in question. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this right here, starting at that first squiggly, work my way down. And I'm going to copy this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into Slack BlockKit Builder. So you can access this right here. Let me delete this. There we go. And this takes you to the Slack BlockKit Builder. So very, very simple, very easy to do. You can essentially come here to the right-hand side, select all and paste. Oops, I made a mistake. So very, very easy to do. What you need to do first is essentially go to modal preview, because this is a modal pop-up and now it's working correctly. So I'm just going to paste it once more. And there we are. Hey, Angel, need to upload an image, blah, blah, blah. So here we go. So this is our BlockKit image. Now, if I want to customize this, it's as easy as on the left-hand side, clicking on button. And there we go. Now, if I scroll down to the bottom, and maybe instead of saying click me, I can say visit website, since it's a button. And there we go, it updates in real time. Now, the beauty of using BlockKit is that I can essentially copy this URL and send it to a department head and say, hey, is this UI look good to you? Can we utilize this in your pop-up? So essentially, just by copying this URL here at the top, sending it via Slack as well to another team member, when they click on the link, it'll take them directly to this. It'll fill out all this JSON and everything. They can make changes. They can be like, this visit website isn't really necessary. Let's go ahead and remove it. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and copy this and send this back to the other team member. And this allows for easy collaboration. It's not quite, Google Drive or Google Sheets level collaboration, but it is very simple and easy to utilize. Now, once we've gone ahead and created our UI, what we can do is we can head back in here and we can and essentially paste it into the view container. So again, where you put it is very important. This is one of those gotchas that you need to be aware of, essentially making sure that you include this portion. And I'm going to include this template on our show notes. So feel free to utilize the link, essentially use my template as your starting ground so you don't have to start from scratch. And all you need to really do is change this view. I do it all the time. That way I don't have to start from scratch. It's one of the things I really like about n8n is that you really own your own workflows. You can save them to your Google Drive, somewhere you back when I use GitHub, but you can save them and then reuse them as templates for yourself. Now, what this does is it gives you that pop-up. So let's take a look at the other executions. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these to editor as well. This is the second one. This is where we chose the select folder. So you'll notice it's the same thing. And all I'm going to do here is copy the view once more. So I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. There we go, copy. And I'm going to go ahead and paste. There we go. Now, once we do that, you'll notice that here we have that search for existing folder name. We have our binary upload. Now here's another gotcha. So image file binary, this file upload, a couple of things. The maximum number of files you can allow is up to 10. So if you have a workflow that only requires 1 or 2, you can set that here as a limit and the system will limit it, but you can't go over 10. It won't work. But the other thing you can do is allow specific kinds of file types. So in this case, I know that we don't want to host anything other than JPEGs, PNGs, and PDFs. So here we can essentially limit those by adding them as needed. So if I wanted to, for example, add JPEG, we could do that as well. No problem. So that essentially is one of the things to keep an eye out for. But more importantly, there is no file upload option here on the left. You'll notice that that's something that they did not include. This is something that I still don't fully understand why. Now, I will include, all you have to do is take and copy this snippet right here and paste it into the JSON code, and it'll work just fine with BlockKit Builder. It does add another level of complexity, but I find that it's worth it, again, just to reduce the need to upload files to some other third-party repository, since Slack has the ability to store these files. So I'm going to include a link to where in the documentation you can copy this snippet and use it yourself. But again, another kind of gotcha to keep an eye out for. And another important gotcha here is block ID. Block ID and action ID, these two right here. By default, when you use one of these, so let's say I add Markdown to this, or actually Markdown isn't actionable, so let's not do that one. Let's do an input of some kind. Let's do a button. There we go. We have a button right there. So as you can see, we have an action ID defined here, so it will allow you to customize it. But if we do something like the folder selector, so let's see here. Where is it? Section, greeting section, tool selector right here. So block ID. So this is what I'm talking about. You won't always have these block IDs visible. So if I add another button down here. So let's get rid of the original one. So we have our action ID, but we don't always have a block ID. And the reason that this is important, the reason that you may want to add a block ID is because within the platform, if you don't define one, it will create one for you. And it's usually randomly generated, which makes it very hard to target this specific section within BlockKit when routing data. So usually what I'll do is I'll say, hey, look for the block ID tool selector to find the input that we're receiving for this search for folder name. Now, if I don't define this, I don't actually have to have this. So like, for example, we could remove it and it still works just fine. But now it's going to randomly generate a block ID, which means that I don't know what it is. I can't put an if check or a routing block switch in n8n to find it, which makes it very, very difficult. So what I recommend, ChatGPT is amazing at generating templates out of the box for BlockKit. So I recommend, if you have an idea of an input you want, I would just go into ChatGPT and say something like, create a BlockKit template, for this type of input, and please make sure to include block IDs. And then it'll include them for you. You can paste them in here to make sure that it didn't hallucinate something, and utilize that n8n to ensure that you get the same input every single time. And these blocks are all, essentially you can think of these as labels for each of these blocks. They don't always, if you create it, it doesn't always, if you create it using this tool here on the left, it doesn't always create it in the tool. So again, a very important gotcha. So let's head back into the tool and let's take a look at the last step. So we've talked a little bit about how these pop-ups work. Let's go into executions. And let's make our way down to the last step. So it would be the most recent run. Let's go ahead and copy to editor. Let's go ahead and unpin. And there we go. Excellent. So here we go. So here we're going to close the modal pop-up, essentially saying, hey, we've done our job. We've submitted the data we need. We no longer need this pop-up. It's very straightforward. It's just a response body of clear, telling Slack, hey, you can clear out the user interface. It's no longer needed. Or instead, you could actually display, there are ways to display another BlockKit interface saying, hey, it's been successfully uploaded or something along those lines. But typically, I just like to post the results into a channel for simplicity. Now, I've added a routing action here that isn't particularly necessary. You can actually completely remove this. My thought process essentially is to upgrade this in the future to allow for the deletion of files within folders, because again, this S3 bucket is not fully accessible. So what I want to do is essentially expose just the file deletion portion to our users. So essentially what I'll eventually do is add a secondary output here that essentially allows you to delete files. So we'll submit files for deletion and it'll run this S3 bucket, but for delete instead of upload. And it'll just bring in the definition. So for now, you can delete this. This is not necessary at all, and it's not actually doing anything. Now, let's talk about splitting out files. So one of the things within n8n that takes a little bit of practice is understanding how the loop system works. Now, I find the looping in n8n to be very, very easy to use because it keeps track of how many objects are in the loop. So as you can see, there's one object. It's only going to loop one time. And even it says two, it means it executed twice. It looped once and then it outputted once. So that's why it says two. But it knows exactly how many loops it needs to do automatically based on the number of objects it receives. That number is based on an array, a JSON array. Essentially an array being this square brackets that we see here in JSON. So essentially here you can see we've got one item that came in here. And in here we have a bunch of data, essentially an object within it. So what we're doing here is we're getting rid of this whole response, because as you can see, if we switch to JSON view here, we have all this extra data, but what we really care about, and we can see it here, response view state value. So let's find that here, response. So we're gonna find response, we're gonna find view. So here's view, and we're gonna ignore blocks. Here's state. State essentially is like the output. So state values input block. There it is, input block file, file input action, and then here is the file. So here what we've done is I've just clicked and dragged this in here to split everything that essentially will be in this square brackets, this array object, into just that output. So it gets rid of everything else that we've received in this object and only keeps what's in here. And what this allows us to do is it runs the loop as many times as there are files, which makes life so much easier. And that's essentially what we're doing here. So we're looping through each one. The first step is that we're going to download the file locally. So here we're using the HTTP request node. Now you've seen this already a few times in the modal pop-ups. You can think of this as the Swiss Army knife of n8n essentially. So what it allows you to do is it allows you to perform these HTTP requests. You might know them as curl requests or get requests or post requests. But one of the beautiful things about n8n is that you can utilize your credentials here, which is usually the hardest part of these requests. So even if we haven't built support, for example, within Slack for this download option, you can still go into the API documentation, copy the correct method, and import it as curl here, and then just make sure you set your credential type. As long as you've set up credentials in the other node for that software, it'll work just fine here. And that's what we're doing here. Essentially, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, I want you to download the file locally. And that's what we have here. We have a data object instead, or a binary object rather, instead of a JSON object. And this binary object, if I click view, should look very familiar. Here's our Slack logo. I could even download it to my computer if I want, no problem. Now, what we're doing is we're telling it, hey, make sure that we download this as a file and call it data. And we could call it image or whatever we want. I just called it data because that's the default. Now, the upload to S3 bucket has a requirement to upload a binary file. So it wants to know what the name of that binary object is. So here we have our data object, and then here we can tell it what folder, and we can tell it essentially what the file name is. So what I'm doing is I'm passing it. Here you can see the split. Here's the folder. I'm pulling it from the response in the original webhook call under parse webhook right here. And the same for the file name. I'm getting that from the split out, or I'm sorry, from the loop over items. So in the loop over items, I can see where I'm at in the index. So I'm telling it, hey, give me the file name, which it should be right here. So I'm telling it, give me the file name from the loop and give me the folder name from the webhook call. And then I'm basically combining these to let the S3 bucket know where to upload it. And so that's essentially it. Now we're going to either get success true or success false. And what we're doing here now is because we're looping, if it fails, we don't want the whole operation to stop. We want it to keep going. But we need to know if it worked or not. So essentially what we're doing is we're making a little JSON note saying, hey, yep, we were successful. Here's the link right here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to lump all of these outputs together in a way that BlockKit understands. And so what I'm doing is I'm creating that BlockKit manually here. So essentially I'm creating it in a way, we'll take a look at it here in a moment when we get to the end, but this essentially will be comma separated with any other files that we need to in the BlockKit object that we're going to create as a response to our Slack channel. Once we do that, we're going to move on to the next object. This is just a no operation node. Think of it as like a comment node, essentially. And we're going to just loop through these, through as many files as we get, up to 10, and then it'll be done. Now, here again, we have our no operation. This is not necessary. We can delete it. Think of it again as a comment node. I have it here sometimes at the end of a loop just to give me a way to hit the play button to loop through it. And here, it's just an easy way to trigger the full loop, but stop before it goes to the next step. And then here, what we're doing is joining all of these together into one object. So if we had 10 files, we would have 10 outputs here. Here, we combine them into one. And then last but not least, we then post these to Slack. Now, again, this is back again to BlockKit. So if I open up BlockKit here, this is the BlockKit template that we're using. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. And instead of modal, I'm going to do message. And there we go. Now we can see essentially what it looks like. And if we wanted to customize it, maybe delete file or something, we could create like a little quick delete option here. So we could just go into the Slack channel, hit the delete button. It would essentially allow it delete file. It would allow for a quick way for file deletion without having to essentially go through a whole nother interface within Slack or another modal pop-up or searching for it essentially. For now, we'll leave that off, but that's essentially it. So now that gets posted into our Slack channel. We can copy the link and we can utilize this. Now, you might be asking, what are some other ways that this is helpful, right? Image uploads are fine and dandy, but how does that help me? Maybe our teams don't do file uploads. Maybe we just do ticketing or things like that. And so to that end, let's take a look at some of the other tools that we have here. So one of the other ones we have, submit an idea. Let's go ahead and pull that up. So this is where I was talking about earlier that you can essentially remove the silos that might be in your enterprise organization. So we had a slight problem internally here at n8n. Our product team loves Notion, but our support team likes Linear. And that creates an issue. That creates a little bit of a frustration for the users because the users have to learn both of these systems. And not only that, but systems like Notion can be very complex depending on how you set them up. And are we setting up a template, a database, a page? How are we doing this? And then they have to learn those specific gotchas within that platform. So what I've created is a tool that essentially makes them device agnostic. So if you click on bug submission, for example, we'll go ahead and click on that. Submitting this will submit it to Linear. Whereas if we select product idea, it will automatically submit this to Notion. So let's take a quick look at the logic on the back end here. So if we go to n8n projects, we go to IdeaBot, you'll notice that the layout and structure is very, very similar. So here we have our initial kind of menu pop-up. We have our product idea modal pop-up, our pain point bug submission pop-ups, and these will route the data through the submit data option here, and then it gets further routed to the correct tool. So here, as you can see, we're essentially getting the user IDs so that we can get an email address. And then here we are submitting it to the correct database in Notion. And down here, instead, we're submitting it to the right database in Linear instead. So essentially, you can connect this to any number of backend systems, but keep the user experience very simple. And for example, down the road, if we are no longer using Linear and it instead switches to a different tooling, all I have to do is swap out this Linear tool, or this Linear node rather, for whatever API node or even the HTTP request. If we don't actually have support for this new tool, I can essentially just map in a new node, replace the inputs. The inputs essentially remain the same. So if I open this up, as you can see, here's the bug name, here's created by ID, and then the expected action. So all I'd need to copy are these variables right here. And essentially the data would be mapped into the new node. I wouldn't really, it would take me maybe 10 to 20 minutes to update this workflow to support a different system, because all the hard work has already been done in getting the data needed. Another use case that I've seen is, for example, for DevOps. So if we exit out of here and we hit this, we can do request certificate. So we'll give it a moment. And this brings up our Venafi certificate generator. So this also highlights a different way of doing things. So here, for example, what we can do is we can automate some tasks, but we can also put a human in front of some other tasks that might be a little bit more, that might be require human intervention. So for example, here I might, if I'm a bigger organization, I might want to set up a new domain for our organization. I'll type in the domain name, select a validity period, and maybe add some notes. Now, you'll notice it doesn't ask for my information, for my team, because all that information is already going to be sent via that Slack webhook. Now, I can't show you this one live because my Venafi server is no longer active, but let's take a look at the workflow behind it. All right, here it is. Let's go ahead and take a look at the workflow behind it. So I'm going to click on this. And again, very similar. Now you'll notice that we only have one here. There's no need to give multiple options. We only have one submission process here. So we just have that initial pop-up. Here, you'll notice that there is a process for VirusTotal. So what we're doing here is we're allowing the automated system to make a decision. So we're passing it into VirusTotal's essentially URL analysis tool for reputation management. What we're doing here essentially is seeing, hey, does this URL have a good or bad reputation? Once we get the output, we'll essentially have an if check to see if the reputation score meets our threshold. So in here, let's take a look. So if it has less than 0 malicious reports. So if it has less than 0 malicious reports, I'm just going to go ahead and have it auto issue the SSL certificate, send the confirmation to our Slack channel, and call it a day. No human is needed. Now, if it does have malicious reports, we're not going to auto submit it. Instead, we're going to have, if you can actually replace this AI agent with a local AI agent or with ChatGPT, whatever you prefer, but we're going to have it generate a report. that's human readable, and then we're going to have it post to our Slack channel. That's going to include a button that if a human presses that button within the correct team, it'll then auto issue the certificate, essentially reducing the poor IT ops team's work down to one click. And to see this in action, let's take a look. So we have our certificate request channel. So this is what an auto-issued certificate looks like. So no malicious reports, everything's good. We can view the CSR details on the Venafi side. We can revoke it if we feel it should not be live anymore. Now, if it is malicious, as you can see here, we give a slightly scarier message saying, hey, there might be a problem here. This is the person who requested it. This is the score, and here's a slight, AI analysis and a risk assessment. So, and then here we have our next steps. So essentially this was, I believe, all generated by the AI report. And so here, by pressing the submit for approval, we can essentially bypass the warning and go ahead and auto issue the certificate. So essentially, sometimes the processes don't need to be fully automated, but they do need to be made simpler so that the humans can kind of take a step in, take a look, make sure everything's okay. But then we again reduce that human's work down to the smallest number of clicks, one, if possible, to do their job. So, and then we have it here. Now, because we're getting all this information here, we can also add nodes here to audit this. So we can maybe have a Google Sheet, hopefully not, but some kind of a database that will log the user data that we receive from Slack to the database saying, hey, employee XYZ, John Doe, he submitted this for approval. And if for some reason there's backlash down the road because it shouldn't have been approved, we can go look at that database and say, hey, employee XYZ, why did you approve this? And kind of follow it back down the chain of command. So these are all, I think, different ways of incorporating the same BlockKit process within Slack to help make life easier for both the users and IT ops teams. And the BlockKit system within Slack is so flexible and so powerful that I feel that we've only scratched the surface of what's possible. Now, let's go ahead and jump back into our slides real quick. Let's kind of summarize a little bit about what we've learned today. So let's kind of go over our gotchas once more. Make sure that you have block IDs. If you don't, it's going to give you a headache when you build things using the BlockKit builder. Very important. Make sure that they have block IDs. Make sure that you customize them so that the outputs are not randomly generated. The file upload option does not exist within the BlockKit builder. So I will include a link in the show notes that takes you to the documentation page for it that you can just copy the snippet and change it to your heart's content. And then the other thing is for the HTTP request modals, those currently are not fully supported within n8n. You do need to use our Swiss Army knife, the HTTP request tool, but essentially it is very easy to do. And using the template that I'm going to provide also in the show notes for this, it doesn't take very long or much time at all to just use my template to replace that view object that we looked at earlier. So to summarize again, some of the big picture IT ops uses, onboarding, offboarding, I think are great ways to utilize this system, either through an automated fashion by listening to new employees being added to the directory, or using the modal pop-ups for having a managers fill out a report of a new user to say, hey, this has been hired, or for human resources, for employees themselves to be able to essentially ask questions or submit tickets. Behavior analysis, you can actually listen to events in Slack channels and have them feed into an n8n workflow and take action if needed. Welcome messages, although I believe Slack does offer this as well. Knowledge aggregation, skill tracking, things like that. Same for HR. HR, I think, is a great way to utilize this platform to request, tool access, collect onboarding feedback. Because everything comes in through webhook requests, you can feed these into some kind of auditing tool that you might have internally. And again, it makes things platform agnostic, which is key in enterprise organizations. And lastly, I feel like DevOps has an advantage when using these tools because DevOps already understands the basics of programming, and those teams understand essentially how environments work. That allows them to deploy n8n if they want to use, for example, the community edition to try this workflow out and deploy it into a secure internal environment, see how it works, and then they can also build workflows as well. So if you have a DevOps team, you have an advantage, I believe, over some organizations that don't. So we've covered the basics of using Slack and n8n today to create powerful UIs and workflows. So essentially, from streamlining IT operations to connecting different silos within different teams, I believe that this solution can help just about any enterprise or IT ops organization bring everything together into one place. So I do want to remind you, don't forget, sign up for future webinar events. I look forward to having more of these in the future, and my hope is that we can do these live. So as you have questions, you can ask them, and I can answer them live over the video as well. So thank you for joining today's session. I look forward to your questions, and feel free to leave any questions you might have in the comments. It's been a pleasure, and happy Flowgramming.